Thanks for joining us today. In today's episode, we'll be tackling quality journalism and misinformation. First, we'll be speaking with Claire Wardle, co-founder of First Draft, the world's foremost nonprofit focused on research and practice to address mis- and disinformation. Then we'll hear from Syed, an award-winning Indian journalist and founder of Data Leads, and Surabhi Malik, program director and country lead for India at Internews. They're talking about FactShala, a news and information literacy initiative centered around spotting misinformation. Let's join the conversation.
Hi everyone, my name is Alexis Monsalis, and I am the News and Information Credibility at Google's News Lab. I run our efforts to support the news ecosystem combat misinformation, and I product manage aspects of our fact-checking features. I'm joined by Claire Wardle, the director of First Draft, a global nonprofit focused on empowering journalism with the skills and tools to combat misinformation. Claire is one of the world's leading experts on this topic, and we're so very grateful for her time.
Hi, Alexios.
In the interest of full transparency, I should flag that the Google News Initiative has been a founding supporter of First Draft. So let's get straight into it. The key topic of misinformation for this year for many journalists and fact-checkers around the world has been COVID-19. It has generated what public health experts are calling an infodemic, essentially a parallel pandemic of unreliable and problematic information. It has affected the work of fact-checkers globally in an unprecedented manner. So Claire, when did you realize this was going to be the dominating narrative for those fighting misinformation? And how did you start preparing?
So it was in January, actually. We were on the road training American newsrooms to be prepared for the election. I remember one of my team members who speaks Mandarin saying, wow, Claire, there's a ton of conspiracies on TikTok about Bill Gates and the coronavirus. And back in January, in the US at least, we weren't necessarily taking it that seriously, both the virus and what became the infodemic. But I remember putting that in a slide to show to American journalists. We're like, A, TikTok is something to be thinking about. And B, we're already seeing the rise of conspiracies. Let's have a conversation about it. But I would say at First Draft, it was only really the end of February. Actually, I remember talking with you about Italy at the end of February. We were at an event together. And I was like, oh, this is getting serious. And so really from that moment on, it's just been, it's been a year. I think in terms of preparing.
Last in-person event, I think, right?
That was true. But I think preparation, one interesting thing about misinformation is over the last 4 years at least, there has been more funding for misinformation, but it's mostly been around elections. So many of us who work in this space have been prepared for working on an event. And we've got processes, we've got systems, we know how to work. And so in many ways, once we recognized that coronavirus related misinformation was going to be a thing, we actually had been practicing for a number of years around something like this. It was just a case of changing keywords and thinking slightly differently. But really, a lot of this we had been practicing for the last 4 years.
It's interesting. And this has been in many ways a very similar wave of misinformation that kind of hit countries gradually. So there was a great effort, a great set of collaboration. But in general, what would you say was the thing that newsrooms did best to grapple with this infodemic?
So I think newsrooms really did their very best. But I think the lessons that we've all learned is that trying to report on something that's so new is really challenging. So newsrooms, I think, recognized that there was a vacuum that they needed to fill with quality information, and they did their very best to get that out to audiences as quickly as possible. But in the rush to do that, some of the challenges has been that the science hadn't necessarily caught up. So how to report on masks, how to report on how the virus spread, is it airborne or not? I mean, we can look back and say there were mistakes, but I think it's on all of us actually who work in the information space to think about how did we work together to think about what does the audience need, how do we get them that information, and how do we talk about uncertainty without causing confusion? And I don't think any of us got that quite right. I think there's a huge number of lessons learned, but lots of people were trying to do their best. But this was a real challenge in reporting on an unfolding story when the science, even now, is still trying to work its way through what we really know and what we don't.
So you mentioned kind of the science and health authorities as well, and so I want to ask you about platforms as well. But before we get to that, I want to ask you about scientists and health authorities. What role did they play in fighting the infodemic, and how could they? There's plenty more left. So what can they do to improve on what they've already done?
There is plenty more left. I do have some sympathy. My background is as an academic, and I understand that the way that science works is that different scientists build on knowledge, and it's incremental, and it's about, can you replicate results? And it's a very important process, and that's how we know as much as we know now. The problem around a pandemic was that we had this kind of desperate need to know right now. And so unfortunately, we had things like preprints, which is part of the scientific process, is that people release relatively small studies, and normally nobody pays any attention unless you're another scientist in that very small space. Now journalists would find bots on Twitter that alerted them to that science and be like, oh, this is new information, we need to get it out to the public. And this mismatch between this desperate need to get out information with the kind of the complexity and nuance of science has sometimes clashed. And we've seen that with the WHO and CDC, who've been doing their very best. But in many ways, they've been acting as they've always acted, which is working as scientists. They're not necessarily communications professionals who understand that right now in our information ecosystem, people need clear guidance that's visually engaging, highly shareable, and that there's a clash there. And I think that's one of our biggest lessons, is that how do we give information to audiences whilst also ensuring that we don't lose that nuance and complexity, but to understand that there is a tension there.
So let's talk a little bit more about that information ecosystem, the infrastructure that in many ways both carried both the good content and the misinformation, the platforms. What do you think, writ large, what do you think organizations did well and did poorly throughout these past 9 months?
So I think those of us who've been thinking about misinformation, we were kind of astounded in April and May, because we saw more from the platforms than I think we'd ever seen. And there was this flood of stories in the press, which seemed odd because they were kind of positive about the platforms, which we haven't seen for a while. But that was because there was this sense in March and April, well, this is health misinformation. This isn't political disinformation, it's health misinformation. So if we work with the WHO and CDC, then they are the arbiters of truth. They can tell us what's right or wrong. We can link to them and we can breathe a sigh of relief. This is going to work out well. Unfortunately, as we moved into kind of June, we saw the politicization of COVID. We saw politicization of whether or not to wear masks, whether or not it was airborne, whether or not there should be a lockdown, whether or not there should be a vaccine, and whether or not, all of those questions suddenly became rooted in politics, which has then reminded the platforms and all of us that we can't segment misinformation. We can't say, oh, that's easy to solve, this is difficult. All of this is challenging. I think that I'm glad that we've seen the platforms take steps to recognize that we need to intervene when there is dangerous misinformation that might lead to harm. I still think we're trying to figure out what that looks like. We're still hopefully doing research on what some unintended consequences might be. But I felt like this year was a good year for platforms, but we've got a long way to go. And if the COVID infodemic was the moment that allowed platforms to find a little bit more, I was going to say, courage to take some of these steps, that's a good thing. But we can't sit back and be like, oh, well, the platforms showed that this worked, because we don't actually know yet what worked and what didn't. What we need to do is to intervene, iterate, test, all those sorts of things that the platforms are very good at.
Thank you. And you mentioned vaccines, and of course, it's what's next in the phase of the pandemic and containment. And so with a vaccine, depending on when people watch this at the horizon, rolled out, what have we learned from misinformation about other vaccines, of which there has been plenty, that can help prepare fact-checking for this immunization process in particular? And in fact, what is something unique about this process that means we can't learn from previous efforts?
It's a big question. So 2021 is going to be the year of COVID vaccine misinformation, but actually we need to be ready now. At FactShala, we've been doing research on posts in English, French, and Spanish, large scale, looking at hashtags or keywords around vaccines. Nobody will be surprised to hear that almost all of the posts are already about the COVID vaccine. And there are some interesting differences by language. But one thing I'd say is that our research is about narratives. So sometimes I get frustrated that we kind of play this whack-a-mole approach and we think about individual atoms of content. Is this post true or false? Should it be left up or should it be taken down? Should it be labeled or not? But actually, if you understand the way that the audience is networked, I mean, this is the joy of social media. Everybody is networked in different ways. And I think those of us who work in the quality information space still think in a broadcast mentality. If I have enough people following my Twitter account, if I have enough people listening to my radio station, this is going to work. But the networked approach means that narratives are being constructed, and they're being constructed in pretty sophisticated ways, and they're playing out in different ways in different communities. So for example, if we look at English language vaccine information online, right now the biggest narrative is about safety and efficacy, which is questioning the vaccine, but it's also about freedom and liberty. So it's not about, is the vaccine, should I take it or not? It's those people trying to make you take the vaccine. This is about your freedom to make a decision about the vaccine. So if we're thinking about how do we counter those kind of messages, then we need to understand the way that it's being framed. Similarly, in Spanish language, it's much more about morality and religiosity. So how can that be framed by understanding that narrative that's being used to push whether or not you should take the vaccine? So I think the next step for those of us understanding the information ecosystem is understanding narratives and frames as opposed to individual pieces of content. I think next year, we need to think very carefully about, there's a lot of reasons people are not going to take this vaccine. And we can't say, oh, it's just the anti-vaxxers. Because actually, when you do this kind of network analysis, you understand how these frames and narratives are moving through the ecosystem. And it is not one way, it's not linear. And we have to stop thinking in that way, which I think, unfortunately, those of us who work in the quality information space too frequently think that way, as opposed to the way that memes travel through networks. That's what we should be worried about. And that's how we should be thinking about how do we counter those kind of narratives.
Very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about, still within, obviously, the effects of COVID has been the fact that we've all been locked up at home. And so I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on how that has affected both individual beliefs or capacity to believe or perceptions of conspiracy theories broadly, and then on the flip side, kind of journalism's capacity to fight back on misinformation, because obviously journalists are people too, and they were at home. So I'm just interested in kind of reception and efforts to fight it while at home.
So part of the challenge with all of this is I think there's a disproportionate focus on, well, if we want to sort out this problem, surely Facebook can just tweak its algorithm. Surely we can just have more government regulation. And we actually don't talk about the people who receive this misinformation and what condition under which are they receiving it. And I think the last 6 months, for all of us, absolutely every one of us on this planet, our lives have been turned upside down in ways that we could never have imagined. And that has caused very high levels of anxiety, which I don't think we've necessarily thought through. And the problem is when human brains are anxious, it's flight or fight. We are much less likely to be critical and rational, and we're desperately seeking explanations for the reason we're in the mess that we're in. So people want origin stories. Where did this virus come from? Why didn't we know it was coming? How can I protect myself and my family from getting it? How long is this going to last? Am I going to be financially secure? And so in those moments, people were looking for explanations. And unfortunately, we didn't have clear, and we still don't have clear explanations to provide to people why their lives have been turned upside down. So people are online searching for those explanations. And you know who creates and provides those explanations? Conspiracy theorists. Conspiracies are simple, powerful narratives that provide an explanatory framework. And so on one hand, we've got nuanced and complex scientists saying, oh, give us a bit more time and a bit more data. On the other side, somebody like, I'll tell you who to blame. It's these elites. They're the people who've caused this. And so all of a sudden I'm at home. I want to feel better about this situation. And somebody's providing me with that. So if we don't take conspiratorial thinking seriously, those of us who want to fight this, then we're in trouble. Because again, from a journalist's perspective, too often we've had headlines saying that people believe the conspiracy theories are crazy, they're insane, using really problematic language, very derogatory language to talk about conspiracy theories. There is a reason there's been a rise in conspiracy theories over the last 6 months, and we need to be empathetic to why that's happening, why people are susceptible to believing these conspiracy theories. And it's a very human desire to have a story that explains what's happening. And I think journalists understand stories, but I think we've kind of lost our way a little bit in terms of providing space to create those stories that are explanatory, but from a position of truth and accuracy. And that's really need to think much more about next year, because we can't just keep like, why is this happening? Why do people believe this? They do, and there's a reason that they do, and we need to really tackle that.
Really interesting. In terms of, let's move away a moment from COVID and talk about other misinformation generating events. First Draft has a global remit, and you guys are monitoring all kinds of things. Of course, COVID is going to be informing all kinds of topics, but what are you looking to 21 for in terms of potential risk vectors for kind of massive misinformation events?
So I think 2021 obviously is going to be about vaccines, but also climate. So in 2020, obviously because of COVID and also the US election, which has kind of sucked the energy globally out of the news space, we actually haven't talked enough about climate. And climate is another one of those topics that unfortunately is a real victim of misinformation. And we've seen that with some of the bushfires globally and other things. So that's something that we're really looking to next year. And unfortunately, misinformation that intersects with hate. Like, this is a global problem in every country that we work. We see the ways that misinformation is being used as a weapon against other types of people. And, obviously I'm based in the US. The levels of polarization in the US are deeply problematic, but we also see this in many other countries. Very few people say, I want to live in a society where we're really divided. And I think we have to understand, I would argue, the kind of drip of low level, hateful content, harassing content. Because I think, again, we focus on these big events and these big false rumors or fabricated content. And what we miss is this low level of speech that doesn't break any platform guidelines, but it's relentless. And I think I worry about thinking longitudinally where that leads as a society. So I think if we don't always have an eye on that kind of speech, we're going to continue to get into situations where people say, how come we're here? How come the election looks like this? Well, it's because of this idea that people are dividing, people that don't look like them, people who don't think like them. And that's something that really worries me.
So, we've by nature of this conversation spoken a bit of doom and gloom, but I did want to maybe wrap up our conversation with some advice for not just the journalists with whom First Draft primarily works with, but actually just everyday users, citizens, people who want to do their part. And obviously you've given a TED Talk on the power of everyone's involvement and on how important really each individual is in kind of reclaiming an information ecosystem that is clean, accurate, and for everyone's needs. So what is your advice, for Draft advice? What tips do you have for people who might be watching this?
Yeah, so for the last 4 years, I think all the conversations about misinformation is, what can the platforms do? What can government do? And we've really failed to say, what can people do? And the one message I always say is, we have to take responsibility for not only the information we share, but the information that our friends and families share. Because I think it's been very easy to just mute your friend from high school or your uncle. But actually, if we as a society don't talk to one another to say, I know that just seems like a post that you shared on Facebook, it doesn't really seem very serious. But actually, all of these posts that all of us are sharing cumulatively are leading to a situation where our society is starting to really be in trouble. And not just our society, our community or our family. And I think that we have to have harder conversations with each other about this, because I think we haven't necessarily said we each have a responsibility. And with all of us, and I've sometimes said this before, but it's like if every one of us throws a Coke can out of the window, every one of us says, oh, it's just a Coke can, what does it matter? But when all of us do it, we're driving down really, really messy roads. And that's kind of how the information ecosystem feels. And I think talking to one another with empathy to say, this content is actually dividing us and it's actually creating a society that none of us really want to live in. So I think it's about taking this seriously and not hiding from the harm that this kind of information can cause. And I think one thing that this year has taught us is that particularly health misinformation can lead to harm. And the good thing is that health authorities are now really thinking about misinformation in a way that they weren't before. There does seem to be a much bigger conversation about the harms of misinformation. That can only be a good thing.
Appreciate that, Claire. And First Draft has launched a text message course that I have recommended to a lot of people. Is that's still up? Is that something we can point people to?
Yeah, so the challenge, everybody knows this, is if you say, oh, do you want to take a course on misinformation? Nobody says, sign me up. So we actually created this SMS course where every day you can choose the time. If you love 6 a.m., you can get a text at 6 a.m. or 10 p.m. and
If
it
your toddler
arrives as a
wakes you
little
up at
nugget of
6 a.m.
content. It's a little nugget of content that just gives you either an explanation of different terminology, or it tells you how to talk to your crazy uncle, or it gives you some verification tips. But it's really bite-sized and it comes every day for 14 days. We're testing it right now in the US, but we have got good feedback. And I would love to think about more innovative ways that we can bring the community into these conversations, because there are many people who really care. And I think too often we talk about bad actors. Let's talk about the good actors. There's so many people who are like, sign me up, how can I help? And I really hope that next year we can find a way to encourage more people to be part of this fight. Essentially, that's what it is.
Yeah, to a certain extent, we're all can be both good and bad actors. If we're sloppy online. So, all right, thank you so much. That was Claire Wardle, Executive Director of First Draft News. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Alexios. It was a pleasure.
What excites me about the future of news, paradoxically, is the technology, but it's the technology enabling the human value of the journalists. I think that if we're going to be in a situation where the technology is supporting the journalist rather than controlling the journalist, then that's going to allow the human factor of the critical thinking, the creativity, and the ability to relate to the public, to the citizen, to the user.
I think I'm most excited about the reinvention that is inevitably coming. And I know that a lot of it has already happened over the course of the last several years. But now because of COVID-19 and the way that it has fundamentally changed the economics of our business, I think that acceleration is going to yield a lot of new formats, a lot of new ways of storytelling and attract new audiences. I really look forward to seeing all of that invention.
Really excited about the future of news. I think what I'm most excited about is that readers are learning that quality news is worth an investment and a share of wallet. Information seekers, lifelong learners, the intellectually curious will see a news subscription as essential to their lives, as essential as their Netflix subscription or fitness membership. I really do believe that as a society, I believe that as Americans, really as global citizens, we are coming to a greater understanding of the value of quality news. I think people are understanding that reporters are doing really incredibly hard and worthwhile work, and that people are going to be more and more willing to make an investment in subscriptions, in news subscriptions.
Hello everyone, namaste and adab to one and all from India. My name is Surabhi Malik and I'm the Program Director in India for Internews, which is an international non-profit that works to empower people worldwide with high quality and trustworthy information that they need to connect with their communities, participate in their communities, and hold power to account. For more than 35 years, in over 100 countries, Internews has worked to build healthy information environments in places where they're most needed. At Internews, we strongly believe that trustworthy information can not just change, but actually also save lives. And today, I have with me my colleague Syed. Syed, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Surabhi. I'm Syed Nazakat. I'm a founder and CEO of Data Leads, which is a digital media initiative based in New Delhi. We work essentially in the field of data analysis and data-driven storytelling, fact-checking, and larger space of information landscape. But at the heart of our work essentially is the same understanding that the equal access to information is the most important thing for any person, for any citizen, anywhere in the world. And why don't I come back to you, Surabhi, and why don't we talk about the recent initiative which we have recently started in India called FactShala? Why don't you share some details about that project?
All right, just for our audience, Internews and Data Leads have been proud partners since 2018, working together to fight misinformation in India, which happens to be the second largest internet population of the world. And today, we are going to talk to you about a new project called FactShala. FactShala, which means the School of Facts, is a media and information literacy program for adults in Tier 2 and Tier 3 non-metro cities of India and underserved communities in rural India, launched by Internews in collaboration with Data Leads and with the support of Google.org and Google News Initiative. In this season of All the Spotlight on Hand and Respiratory Hygiene, FactShala aims to tell people and communities around that they should pay equal attention to information hygiene and be very cautious of the information that they consume. We are on a mission to help our audience navigate the maze of online information and handle the information overload that they are often subjected to. Majority of our audience are fairly new to the use of internet and are mobile first and more importantly mobile only. We want to equip them to understand better their information ecosystem and really know the nature of content that they access online so they are able to assess for themselves the information that they're accessing, whether it is true or not. We really want to take media literacy beyond schools and colleges, and we want to take media literacy where our audiences are. We want to take media literacy to their homes, to their shops and offices, to hilltops, in their drawing rooms, and actually workplaces where we can find them. We want them to stop, pause for a minute, and really verify information before they share it with others, because we know a lot many times their intention to help others can backfire if the information is wrong. Syed, why don't you now tell our audiences a bit more about the need to really launch something like FactShala in India?
Thank you so much, Surabhi. FactShala, as Surabhi rightly shared with the audiences here, is a very important initiative. It's important in a sense that for the first time ever in the human history, we have reached a stage globally and saying, well, we have more information available. We have more sources of information available. Like 50 years back, 100 years back, people used to have a newspaper or then maybe the radio station. Then 50 years back, it became a TV station. And those were essentially the major sources of information. But today, there are thousands of sources of information available to people. Huge chunk of information comes every day across anybody's in a daily life. But the question is, do we really have competencies to understand whether this information is correct or not, whether this information is truthful, is based on evidence, or this is misinformation. And we know the consequences of that if we do not understand and appreciate the difference between the two globally. So in India, essentially, is a huge country, 1 billion plus population. We speak more than 400 languages. We have 28 states and different culture, different educational levels. That actually essentially creates a situation for us where we are seeing also for the first time in this country as well that a huge number of population is accessing internet for the first time. A young generation, a new generation is coming to internet without essentially having a knowledge and having a understanding whatever they see on internet, whether that is true or not, whatever they see on social media, whether that is true or not. They do not have those competencies. And that essentially is the background of FactShala. That essentially is telling us that India, by large, today stands globally at a place where we have the majority of people. If you look at the social media platforms, different platforms, for example, the Facebook has the highest number of users in India. WhatsApp has highest number of people across the world. The largest chunk of people around the world who access WhatsApp, download WhatsApp, are based in India. And we are seeing the same thing with other platforms as well. So people are accessing information, people are consuming information, sometimes without really actually understanding whether this information is right or not. So we have seen the consequences of that. For example, in a state called Jharkhand in India, we have seen how a video, which was about an awareness video from another country to make people aware that the child could be taken away, kidnapped, or it was essentially a child safety film, which was made as an awareness thing. But then somebody played up with that video. He manipulated the video, he edited the video, and he circulated that video among the people in Jharkhand first. And that video became the reason for the mob lynching, in which more than 15 to 16 people died in one state alone. And then we have seen the other consequences of misinformation in the country. So we're dealing with this very serious challenge, and it needs a long-term engagement, a long-term vision, and it needs a participation of common people, that each one of us should be able to be aware what is fact, what is opinion, what is fake, what is misleading, what is misinformation, what is disinformation. It's fundamentally important, and that's why the FactShala is a very unique initiative. And that takes me to the another question to Surabhi. What is the most unique thing about this initiative?
Very well put, Syed. And I think, just like you said, to cater to an audience in a country as vast and diverse as India, alone we could have only done so little. But we know together, when we bring more people with common passion about media literacy together, we can do so much more. So at FactShala, we follow a unique train the trainer model. At the heart of this program is a core team of 250 trainers that comprise of journalists, fact checkers, media educators, non-profit workers, and community radio stations coming from different states across the length and breadth of the country and speaking the very many different languages that we all as Indians are so very proud of. Once trained by FactShala, these trainers go back and train the communities in their cities and districts across the country in the language of their preference, in the language and dialects that they prefer, and include examples which resonate so much more than any other resource which could have been built only in English. This indeed is the USP of our program. Our training resources are in fact available in more than 7 languages. Also, our trainers have been trained on a curriculum that has been built with the advice and inputs of media and literacy stalwarts coming from India and abroad. The curriculum itself is evidence-based and draws from a user study that we did before we set off on this exercise to really diagnose and analyze what makes our end audience fall for misinformation. Another strength of the program is that we're not keeping media and information literacy exercises restricted only to the metro cities. FactShala trainers are present in almost every state and union territory of the country and are able to give access to the audiences there to learn how they can critically analyze and evaluate online content.
Thank you, Surabhi. The challenges certainly are enormous. And the challenges start from with our basic literacy level in the country. We have seen almost like 25% population of our country still does not have a basic education. And what does that mean? And 25% of India means a huge, of 1 billion population means a huge chunk of population actually do not have a basic literacy levels. So leave aside information literacy. And that certainly creates a huge challenge. And then we have also seen this, it's not just that, it's just the people who do not have a basic formal education, they are vulnerable to misinformation. Not really. We have seen educated people, doctors, engineers, lawyers, almost everyone is vulnerable to misinformation because misinformation comes in different shapes and colors, in different textures, so that it's also sometimes deliberately created to mislead people. And that means essentially a common person, even if he is educated, is not able to distinguish what the information he's watching, consuming, whether that information is accurate or not. We have seen in so many cases in India where the source of misinformation were the big prominent people, were really educated, celebrities, influencers, almost everyone at one time or another one fell for the misinformation. So I think that is number one. If you ask me, in India, that's a really important challenge, a larger lack of information literature, information literacy education in the country. That is number one. I think second is that suddenly in the last 5, 6 years, which is a good thing, that internet became extremely cheap in India. That means a new generation of people, millions of people came to internet for the first time in their life, and they had no idea to distinguish what is a reliable website, what is a reliable source of information on internet or not. They went to Twitter, Facebook, or any, for that matter, any platform, and whatever they see there, they believe that this is true information because somebody has written it, somebody has posted it online as a blog, as a photo, as a video. But I think that also creates a challenge for us because a completely new generation is online, but they do not have skills, they do not have competencies to understand and differentiate what is news, what is opinion, what is fact, and what is just a myth for that matter. We're also seeing, I think, in the country that we're also, the whole atmosphere, you can say, is changing in terms of also how we are opening up for a lot of information which is coming from across the borders. We're living in a globalized world, but we do not really have tools and techniques. At least a common person does not really know what are the simple tools which he can use to make sure that whatever information is coming from some other part of the world, he is able to verify that information. I think that is also a huge challenge. And what we have also seen that traditional media organizations somewhere down the line have really struggled with the concept of fact checking online verification because essentially for generations they were trained and they knew that there's a gatekeeping and they knew how to do the gatekeeping for a traditional source of information, that there's a press release, there's an interview, they will publish that interview, they will publish that press release, and then people will read it tomorrow or people will watch it on a TV. But then for the first time ever, also for them, because when the social media became so big, and then when the WhatsApp became the kind of a newspaper for people, they were somehow also unable at a larger level or struggling to a larger level to verify the information. So I think these couple of things are creating a very unique challenge for us, particularly because we are a country of more than 400 languages, and I think that's why the FactShala is perfectly timed at a time where we really need to have a larger debate in the country about how important it is for all of us to be aware and have some basic competencies to consume information critically before even we share with others. That also takes me to my last question to you, Surabhi. Like, what are the early glimpses of our work in FactShala? What are we doing essentially in India across the villages and towns? And what is the initiative all about? And what are the early successes of it?
Thank you, Syed. As we stressed earlier, that our trainers really are the strength and pillars of the program. And even at the time of a pandemic, they are finding unique ways to connect with their communities. By doing online trainings, by doing offline trainings, keeping physical distancing in mind, and sometimes even adopting a hybrid model of sorts, where they relay the session really to a place where some people have gathered in a place, keeping physical distancing norms in mind and finding innovating ways to connect with them and really pass on the light of media and information literacy at a time when they really critically need it the most. It's only been a little over a month that we've completed our first training of trainer programs, and already our trainers are on the ground in various cities and districts across the country, organizing trainings in different languages and dialects. So far, about 3,500 people have participated in our trainings and benefited from them in these participations. And these participants come from about 100 cities and villages across the country. Some of the early trainings that we've seen have been organized for groups like the LGBT community in Maharashtra, like the urban slum dwellers in Pune and Maharashtra again, also for tea garden workers in West Bengal. One of our trainers also organized a training for the Rohingya refugee camp in Jaipur in Rajasthan and really met with the community there and helped them entangle the web of fake news and help them know how to access the trustworthy information that they will need to improve their lives and take charge of their lives. Another training was held in Dhanbad in Jharkhand, which is another training happened in Dhanbad in Jharkhand, which has been one of the epicenters of the mob lynchings due to fake rumors that you just mentioned in your talk, some time ago. We hope with their combined efforts, we will be able to break this chain of fake news. In fact, we've just wrapped up our fourth TOT with the community radio stations, and we are very confident that they will now very soon start airing programs for the village audience in their own respective areas and spread information about media and information literacy and how to critically consume information. With that, Syed, I would like to, ask you, what do you think is the long-term mission of our program? We've seen some early, successes. It's great momentum. Long-term, what do you think is the FactShala mission?
I think we're certainly here. There's a certainly need for a long-term investment into the media literacy, information literacy. We are a young country, we are a big country, and I think somehow there's a huge space out there, and we have to fill up that. And it certainly needs an approach which is a bottom-up, a grassroots approach. You can't keep, like you can't start something from a top and try to improve things going back. No, but that's why the FactShala is so different in its approach, because it's essentially aimed to empower people at a grassroots level and create a larger ecosystem that people themselves, even without tools for that matter, without any like a tech tools, they're able to distinguish what is misleading, what's harmful, and what is truthful information. We are trying to have a dialogue with communities across the country about the need of critical thinking, the need of thinking about what we are thinking about information, the need of essentially trying to understand our own biases sometimes, which make us vulnerable to misinformation. It's an open interaction with communities, a dialogue with the communities, so that they understand and they appreciate and they build capacities so that they are able to make better decisions about their life when they have a better information. So I think it's also a debate, because there also there's a kind of a misconception that the information literacy is essentially related to media and society at large has nothing to do with it. But I think that's also kind of not really correct assessment of the whole concept of information literacy, which is essentially that everyone in the society should be able to understand information, consume information critically before he shares that information with someone else, or even before he consumes that information and takes decision, any life decision, any daily life decision on the basis of that information. So I think the FactShalas, eventually the vision is that everyone across the country is able to deal with a lot of content which is online and consume it critically, consume it in a way that when they are able to take the decisions based on accurate information. So I think that is essentially, you can say, our hope of, that with the help of all the partners, with the help of all the trainers, we're able to build a grassroots initiative, a platform where people will exchange ideas, discuss these things, because we're going to deal with a lot of stuff moving forward. There will be more information. And I think each one should be able, individually should be able to deal with huge chunk of information explosion. And I think that was Surabhi, what we are trying to do with the FactShala.
We are here to really, ignite in people the quest for, having access to trustworthy and high quality information. So very well put. I hope we've been able to tell our audience, the endeavor that we've started in India, and we hope to take this forward, with all the support from all of you.
Open for all ideas and all possible collaborations to make it stronger and better, so that we can serve our own communities in a much better way.
Thank you to all our amazing speakers for your wonderful insights and perspectives, and thank you for tuning in. You can view all the episodes in this series on our YouTube channel.